If you think those are weapons, you have never seen humans stop being patient, the old navigator muttered. But the words were lost beneath the laughter rolling across the bridge of the Dominion flagship. Warlord Kaler Voss stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring through the forward display at the scattered formation of Terran ships drifting toward the glowing clouds of the Ashvale Nebula. The crimson gas stretched for hundreds of miles, swirling like slow-moving fire beneath an ocean of stars. To him, it was nothing more than scenery. To the officers surrounding him, it was the perfect place to corner a weaker enemy. A young tactical commander leaned over his console and smiled. Their formation is falling apart. They are trying to run. Another officer chuckled. Look at those old rail cannons. Primitive. They still throw chunks of metal through space. More laughter echoed through the command deck. Kaler never joined in immediately. He enjoyed letting the silence build before delivering the line everyone expected. Primitive weapons, he finally said with a quiet grin. Primitive minds. The bridge answered with approving nods. Their scanners painted the human fleet in neat rows of blue icons. 28 ships, mostly cruisers, a handful of destroyers. Nothing remotely impressive compared to the Dominion armada surrounding them with nearly 3 times the firepower. On the flagship Resolute, Admiral Nathan Brooks listened to the same transmission through intercepted channels without changing expression. He stood beside the main tactical display, holding a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The bridge remained almost unnaturally quiet except for the soft voices of flight controllers reading status updates. Commander Olivia Hayes glanced toward him. Sir, they're broadcasting the insults on every open frequency. Nathan took another sip before setting the mug down. Good. Olivia blinked. Good. If they're talking, Nathan replied, they're not paying attention. Nobody laughed. Everyone on the bridge knew Nathan well enough to understand that when he became this calm, he had already made every important decision hours earlier. Lieutenant Marcus Bennett studied the tactical display with growing concern. They're closing faster than projected. Another 6 minutes, and they'll have firing solutions. Nathan looked at the glowing edge of the nebula filling half the screen. Adjust course 3 degrees starboard. Toward the nebula? Marcus asked. Yes. That cuts our escape routes in half. Nathan nodded once. Exactly. No explanation followed. The order was carried out without another question. Outside, the human ships altered course together with almost effortless precision, slipping deeper into the shimmering clouds while the Dominion fleet eagerly followed. On Kaler's bridge, the maneuver drew another wave of amusement. They're cornering themselves, one captain said. Humans panic just like everyone else. Kaler folded his arms. No, panic looks messy. He watched the disciplined Terran formation continue forward at the same steady speed. This looks like hope running out. His communications officer smiled. Permission to demand surrender? Granted. Seconds later the message crossed the void. Terran fleet, your escape is impossible. Shut down your reactors and prepare to be boarded. Every eye aboard the Resolute turned toward Admiral Brooks. Olivia waited for an answer that might inspire the crew or provoke the enemy. Nathan pressed the transmit button himself. Negative. He released it. That was all. One word. Nothing more. The bridge fell silent again. Marcus shook his head with a nervous smile. That's all we're giving them. Nathan looked through the glass toward the burning colors ahead. That's all they earned. Behind the human fleet, the Dominion warships accelerated with growing confidence. Ahead, the Ashvale Nebula waited in complete silence, as though the ancient cloud had been listening to every word. The bridge of the Resolute stayed quiet after Nathan Brooks ended the transmission. Nobody celebrated the reply. Nobody exchanged confident smiles. The only sound came from the steady rhythm of status reports flowing across the command deck. Range closing, Lieutenant Marcus Bennett said. 120,000 miles. Commander Olivia Hayes glanced toward the rear tactical display where the Dominion fleet continued to tighten its formation. They are hurting us exactly where they want us. Nathan studied the glowing layers of crimson and gold drifting ahead. The Ashvale Nebula looked peaceful from a distance, almost beautiful, but he had spent enough years staring at those clouds to know appearances rarely survived first contact with reality. Maintain current speed, he said. Do not accelerate unless I give the order. Marcus frowned. Sir, with respect, Every tactical manual says we should keep open space behind us. Nathan smiled faintly. That is why they are so confident. Olivia folded her arms. You expected them to chase us. I counted on it. The bridge grew still again. Nobody pressed him for details. They had all served with Nathan long enough to recognize the pattern. Whenever he explained less, he usually understood more than everyone else in the room combined. Across the void, Kaler Voss watched the human fleet disappear deeper into the glowing clouds. His sensor chief looked almost disappointed. Their reactors remained below combat output. Another officer laughed. They are trying to conserve power for surrender. Kaler shook his head. No, they still believe they have choices. He stepped closer to the panoramic display. The human ships never broke formation. They moved with the same deliberate spacing, every cruiser positioned exactly where the next one expected it to be. There was discipline in that movement, but Kaler dismissed it. Discipline without superior technology only delayed the inevitable. Increase pursuit speed by 10%, he ordered. Do not fire yet. His communications officer looked surprised. Warlord, we already have a firing solution. I know. Kaler kept watching the distant blue markers. I want them to understand that every mile they travel belongs to me. Back aboard the Resolute, a soft chime echoed through the bridge. Marcus turned toward the long-range scanners. Sir, they are matching every course adjustment within seconds. Nathan nodded without looking away from the Nebula. Exactly as predicted. Olivia leaned closer. You sound almost relieved. Because they stopped thinking. She looked confused. Nathan rested one hand against the edge of the command table. An enemy who keeps asking questions is dangerous. An enemy who believes they already know every answer becomes predictable. Several younger officers exchanged uncertain glances. They could feel the tension growing, but none of them understood why their admiral seemed calmer with every passing minute. Outside the viewport, the colors of the nebula slowly intensified. Crimson clouds gave way to deep violet streams that shimmered with faint pulses of blue light. Tiny flashes danced inside the drifting gas like distant lightning hidden beneath heavy storm clouds. Marcus stared at the readings. Environmental interference is increasing. Expected, Nathan replied. Navigation sensors are losing precision. Expected. Long-range communications are beginning to fluctuate. Nathan finally looked over at him. Good. Keep recording everything. Marcus hesitated before asking the question that had been bothering him since the chase began. Sir, have you been here before? Nathan looked back toward the glowing clouds with an expression that almost resembled nostalgia. More times than I can count. During the Frontier Wars? Nathan gave a slow nod. Before you graduated high school. Olivia noticed something in his voice that she had never heard before. It was not fear. It was not confidence either. It sounded more like someone returning to an old neighborhood after many years away. You know this place, she said quietly. Nathan answered without taking his eyes off the nebula. Better than anyone on either side of this war. Far behind them, the Dominion Armada continued its steady advance, convinced every passing second pushed humanity closer to defeat. Not a single officer aboard Kaler Voss's flagship realized that every mile they celebrated was another step onto ground their opponent had chosen long before the first ship entered the system. 20 years earlier, HFY had not been a battlefield. It had been a problem nobody wanted. Every major power avoided the region because navigation systems failed without warning, communications drifted out of sync, and even the most advanced sensors returned conflicting readings. The Dominion called it wasted space. Commercial shipping companies called it bad business. Earth quietly called it an opportunity. Back then, Nathan Brooks had only been a Navy commander standing in front of a briefing room beneath Fleet Command in Colorado Springs. The walls were covered with maps of the nebula, each one marked with thousands of handwritten notes. A young engineer pointed toward the display and sighed. We cannot stabilize the environment. We have tried everything. Another officer shrugged. Then forget it. Nobody wants this place anyway. Nathan remained silent for nearly a minute before asking a question that caught everyone off guard. Why are we trying to fix it? The room fell quiet. The lead scientist frowned. Because it is dangerous. Nathan slowly shook his head. Dangerous to whom? Nobody answered. He walked toward the projection and rested one hand on the swirling image of Ashvale. Every civilization keeps asking how to tame this place. I think we have been asking the wrong question. An Air Force colonel crossed his arms. What question should we ask? Nathan smiled for the first time that morning. What happens if we leave it exactly the way it is? That meeting lasted almost 8 hours. By the end of it, the project had a name that would never appear in any public record. Quiet Lantern. No giant construction fleets arrived. No military parade announced the mission. Instead, small civilian survey ships slipped into Ashvale one by one over the next 2 decades. Mining contractors, research teams, environmental specialists, freight companies delivering ordinary equipment that never attracted attention. Every shipment looked routine. Every permit appeared legitimate. Every crew member believed they were working on a different project. Only a handful of people ever saw the complete picture. Nathan was one of them. Back in the present, Marcus Bennett stared at the glowing clouds ahead while reviewing historical charts. "This cannot be right," he whispered. Olivia looked over. "What is it?" "There have been human survey missions out here for 20 years. Exploration records?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Hundreds of them." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "I never heard about any of this." Nathan answered before Marcus could speak. "You were not supposed to." Marcus looked toward him. "Sir, all those civilian contracts." Nathan gave a small nod. "Real companies. Real workers. The humans continue retreating at constant speed." He smiled. "Good. Even frightened prey follows predictable paths." No one on his bridge questioned the report. No one wondered why the human fleet had entered this region so willingly. No one imagined that long before either fleet had crossed into Ashvale, someone had already spent 2 decades turning patience into the most powerful advantage humanity possessed. The Dominion fleet crossed another 800 miles into Ashvale without slowing down. Outside the armored viewports, streams of crimson gas drifted around the warships like slow-moving rivers, interrupted now and then by flashes of pale blue light deep inside the clouds. None of it concerned Warlord Kaler Voss. He had spent his career breaking civilizations that believed geography could protect them. A nebula was only another obstacle waiting to be ignored. His sensor chief looked up from the console. "Visual interference has increased by 12%. Long-range targeting is beginning to fluctuate." Kaler barely looked over. "Compensate." "We already have." "Then stop reporting problems that already have solutions." The officer lowered his head. "Yes, Warlord." A navigation specialist cleared his throat. "Our predictive models recommend maintaining distance until the gas density decreases." Kaler turned toward him with an almost disappointed expression. "You believe those human ships are leading us somewhere dangerous? Prepare plasma batteries for synchronized fire." On the Resolute, the tactical display updated almost instantly. Marcus Bennett watched the Dominion icons tighten their formation and quietly exhaled. They took the bait again. Olivia Hayes looked toward Nathan Brooks. Every recommendation from their own navigation computers is telling them to slow down. Nathan folded his hands behind his back. Pride has always been stronger than software. Marcus smiled. "I am beginning to think you know this Warlord personally." Nathan looked at the approaching fleet. "No, I simply know leaders who mistake confidence for certainty." A soft tone echoed across the bridge as another report arrived. "Environmental ionization increasing faster than forecast." Olivia glanced toward the science station. "Cause?" The civilian specialist shrugged. "Natural fluctuations. At least that is what the models say. We're searching for an escape route." Kaler tapped the display. "Either way, they remain predictable." He raised his voice so the entire bridge could hear him. "Transmit fleet command." "There is something comforting about mathematics," he said. "Enough firepower solves every disagreement." His sensor chief nodded. "Their ships have not altered course." "Because they cannot." The bridge lights reflected across Kaler's polished command table as every officer leaned forward to watch the human formation disappear beneath the incoming barrage. Then something unexpected happened. The plasma streams entered the brightest layers of the nebula, and the clouds answered. At first it was almost impossible to notice. Thin veins of blue light spread through the crimson gas like frost creeping across a window on a winter morning. One Dominion technician frowned. "Warlord, environmental energy readings just increased." Kaler barely looked at him. "Plasma discharge always produces interference. This is different." Another report appeared before the first one finished processing. Then another. Then another. Across the tactical displays, tiny flashes of light began appearing throughout the nebula. each one separated by hundreds of miles, yet somehow awakening in perfect sequence. On the Resolute, Marcus stared at the same readings with growing disbelief. "Sir, those energy spikes." Nathan finally allowed himself the smallest smile. "Right on schedule." Olivia looked from the display back to Nathan. "That was not caused by our ships." "No." "Then what is happening?" Nathan rested both hands behind his back. "They just turned the key." Marcus looked confused. "The key to what?" Nathan answered quietly. Something they never realized was already there. Outside the bridge windows, the nebula slowly transformed. What had looked like random clouds now shimmered with deliberate patterns. Long arcs of blue light connected distant pockets of gas before fading and reappearing somewhere else. The entire region seemed to breathe. Dominion science officers scrambled through sensor data, searching for explanations that refused to fit their models. "Impossible," one whispered. "Natural ionization cannot synchronize over this distance." Another scientist shook his head. "Unless there is an external control system." Kaler heard the conversation and dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "There is no control system hidden inside a nebula. Our instruments disagree, Warlord." He stepped closer to the tactical display. More blue arcs continued spreading through the clouds, not violently, but with calm precision, as though the nebula had been waiting years for someone to wake it. "Scan for human transmitters," Kaler ordered. "Nothing." "Hidden satellites." "Nothing." "Artificial structures." The answer came after an uncomfortable pause. "Nothing that matches known military construction." Back aboard the Resolute, the bridge remained as disciplined as ever, but the expressions had changed. Marcus slowly lowered his headset. "Those civilian missions." Nathan nodded. "They were never here to build a fortress." Olivia watched another pulse ripple across the nebula. "Then what did they build?" Nathan looked out at the glowing clouds that now stretched in every direction like a living constellation. "Nothing." Olivia frowned. "I do not understand." Nathan's voice stayed calm, almost reflective. "We did not build a weapon. We spent 20 years teaching the nebula how to recognize a signal. They believed they fired at us." Another wave of blue light rolled silently across the stars. "They never realized they fired the first command." The Dominion bridge no longer sounded confident. Conversations overlapped as officers compared sensor logs that refused to agree with one another. One screen showed stable readings while another insisted entire regions of the nebula had changed polarity within seconds. "Run the scan again," Kaler Voss ordered. "We already have," the science chief answered, trying to stay composed. "3 times. Then run it a 4th. The officer obeyed without argument. The result came back exactly the same. The glowing arcs continued spreading through the clouds, not randomly, but with the slow precision of something following instructions written long ago. "Warlord," the navigation officer said carefully, "our long-range targeting arrays are drifting by almost 400 yards. Kaler frowned. "Correct the alignment." "We do." The officer swallowed. "It changes again before the correction finishes." Another alert chimed. "External reference stars no longer match predicted positions." "That is impossible," Kaler replied. "The stars are not moving." "No, sir. But every sensor aboard the fleet believes they are." Across the bridge, confidence slowly gave way to uncertainty. Nobody could explain why identical ships flying side by side suddenly reported different locations for the same target. On the Resolute, Marcus Bennett watched the Dominion formation begin making tiny course corrections. "There it is," he whispered. Olivia Hayes looked up. "What?" "They stopped chasing us." Nathan Brooks nodded. "Now they are chasing their own instruments." Marcus almost laughed. "They still think the problem is software." Nathan folded his arms. "Most civilizations trust machines more than experience. We learned that lesson a long time ago." Another human officer looked across the tactical display. "Sir, our own sensors are showing interference too." Nathan nodded. "Of course they are. Then how are we navigating?" Nathan pointed toward a small panel beside the helm. Unlike the glowing digital displays surrounding it, this instrument looked surprisingly ordinary. It held mechanical gyroscopes, engraved calibration wheels, and physical gauges that had to be adjusted by hand. Marcus smiled as realization settled in. "Analog backups." "Exactly." Nathan rested one hand on the old navigation console. HFY has always confused systems that expect perfect certainty. These instruments only measure motion. They never try to guess what the universe should look like. Olivia shook her head with quiet admiration. So while they keep recalculating, Nathan finished the thought. We simply keep flying. Outside, another silent wave of blue light rolled across the nebula. This time it reached deeper into the surrounding clouds, causing faint silver threads to appear between distant pockets of gas. They shimmered for only a moment before fading from sight again. On the Dominion flagship, the sensor chief stared at the display with growing disbelief. Warlord, the interference is no longer isolated. Kaler stepped closer. Explain. Every plasma discharge we released appears to be creating another resonance pattern. The more energy we inject into the nebula. He hesitated. Finish the sentence. The more stable those patterns become. Silence settled over the bridge. For the first time since entering Ashvale, nobody laughed. Kaler looked toward the distant human formation, still moving at the same measured speed it had maintained from the beginning. Not one ship had broken formation. Not one desperate maneuver suggested panic. They looked less like fugitives and more like guides leading an expedition whose destination they had known all along. On the Resolute, Marcus quietly watched the Dominion fleet slow for the first time. Sir, they are beginning to hesitate. Nathan allowed himself the smallest nod. Good. Olivia looked at him. Is this where we strike? Nathan glanced toward the brightening heart of the nebula before answering. Not yet. Why not? He smiled without taking his eyes off the stars. Because they still believe they are studying the battlefield. His voice remained calm as another pulse of light spread silently through the clouds. They have not realized the battlefield has already started studying them. The first order to the human fleet sounded almost disappointingly ordinary. Weapon stations, Nathan Brooks said in the same calm voice he had used all day. Every bridge officer looked toward him. There was no speech. No dramatic countdown. Just another instruction delivered with the quiet confidence of someone following a checklist. Marcus Bennett watched the Dominion formation drifting through the glowing clouds. Their targeting solutions are collapsing. Olivia Hayes added another report. Several ships are adjusting course every few seconds. They no longer agree on where we are. Nathan nodded once. That is enough. He pressed the fleet channel. Prepare railguns. Single volley. Fire by sequence, not by volume. Marcus could not hide his surprise. Only one volley. Nathan looked at him with a faint smile. If you spend 20 years preparing the battlefield, you should not need a second introduction. Across the human formation, rows of magnetic launch systems slowly rotated into position. There were no glowing energy cannons. No massive charging sequence. No spectacular display meant to intimidate anyone. Dominion officers noticed them immediately, and several could not help laughing again. One captain shook his head. After all this, they still trust pieces of metal. Another officer smiled. They really never evolved beyond throwing rocks. Kaler Voss folded his arms. Primitive minds build primitive tools. Maintain advance. The command echoed across the Dominion fleet, but the response was slower than before. Navigation teams hesitated. Sensor officers kept requesting updated firing data. Every screen showed a slightly different picture of the human formation. Confirm target positions, Kaler ordered. The tactical chief hesitated. We cannot confirm them with complete certainty. Kaler frowned. Estimate. There are now 19 different estimates. Before anyone could continue, Nathan's voice reached every human ship. Sequence 1. Fire. A handful of railguns released their payloads. There was no blinding flash. Only a quiet pulse as dense tungsten projectiles disappeared into the darkness. The Dominion bridge barely reacted. One officer actually chuckled. That is all. Then the tactical display changed. The projectiles did not travel where Dominion computers predicted. Tiny shifts in the ionized gas bent sensor calculations just enough to make every defensive algorithm react too late. The tungsten rounds crossed empty space with silent precision, passing harmlessly through regions where Dominion targeting software insisted nothing could travel accurately. Marcus watched the tactical display with quiet amazement. Direct hits. Nathan corrected him gently. Direct arrivals. Olivia smiled. You are saying we never aimed at ships. Nathan nodded. We aimed at where they would finally understand where they actually were. Another human volley followed, still measured, still controlled. No frantic barrage filled the void. Every shot was deliberate. Every launch happened only after the previous sensor distortions settled into predictable patterns. Dominion captains struggled to understand what they were seeing. Their defensive systems continued protecting locations where no threat existed while ordinary tungsten rounds appeared from directions their computers had already dismissed. Kaler stepped closer to the display, disbelief replacing confidence for the first time. How can ballistic weapons outperform predictive targeting? Nobody answered. The science chief quietly whispered, almost to himself, because prediction only works when reality stays simple. On the Resolute, Marcus looked across the bridge. Nobody cheered. Nobody stood up. Every officer calmly completed the next task exactly as they had practiced hundreds of times. Nathan watched the glowing nebula through the forward glass before giving one final order. Maintain formation. Let them keep believing the railguns are the surprise. Olivia glanced toward him. They are not. Nathan slowly shook his head. No, the railguns are only the proof. The real weapon has been patience all along. The Dominion flagship drifted in uneasy silence. Nobody was celebrating anymore. Officers who had spent the entire pursuit mocking human engineering now stared at tactical displays that refused to behave the same way twice. Warlord Kaler Voss slowly walked toward the central command table, his eyes fixed on the scattered streams of data flowing across the projection. "Give me one map," he said. The tactical officer hesitated. "Which one, sir?" Kaler looked up. "What do you mean, which one?" The officer swallowed. "Navigation has one picture. Sensors have another. Long-range optics disagree with both. We no longer know which representation reflects reality." Those words hung over the bridge like cold air before a storm. For the first time in years, nobody aboard the Dominion flagship could honestly say where the battle was unfolding. Kaler turned toward the science division. "There has to be a central source. Find the command node controlling these anomalies." The lead scientist worked furiously across 3 displays before slowly lowering both hands. "There is no command node. Impossible. Everything appears distributed." Kaler frowned. "Explain." "Every energy fluctuation is reinforcing the next one. The nebula is behaving like a living network instead of a machine. There is nothing to destroy because nothing is directing it anymore." Across the void, the Resolute continued gliding through the glowing clouds at the same steady pace it had maintained since entering Ashvale. Marcus Bennett watched another Dominion formation break apart as captains struggled to agree on safe navigation routes. "They are starting to separate." Olivia Hayes nodded. "Their own commanders are choosing different sensor feeds." Nathan Brooks quietly picked up his coffee mug, realizing it had gone cold hours ago. He smiled to himself before setting it back down untouched. Marcus noticed. "Sir." Nathan looked through the forward glass. "Years ago, one of our engineers asked me how we planned to defend something this large." Olivia remembered the old project files. "What did you tell him?" Nathan answered softly. "I told him we would not defend it. We would teach it to defend itself." Neither Marcus nor Olivia spoke. They simply watched another wave of pale blue light ripple through the nebula, as if it understood exactly when to appear. On the Dominion flagship, a young communications officer suddenly raised his voice. "Warlord, incoming civilian transmissions." Kaler looked irritated. "Ignore them. You should hear this." The transmission filled the bridge. It came from an independent cargo captain who had been monitoring the battle from a safe distance. His voice carried obvious disbelief. "Dominion Command, this is Merchant Vessel Horizon Star. We have been watching from outside the nebula. Your fleet is not following the human ships anymore. You are circling each other." Silence swallowed the bridge. Kaler stepped toward the observation window. From where he stood, everything still looked orderly. But the external transmission painted a completely different picture. One by one, additional civilian vessels confirmed the same observation. The Dominion fleet believed it was advancing in perfect formation, while neutral observers watched it drift into widening circles around the glowing center of Ashvale. The realization spread faster than panic ever could. They had not lost because human weapons were stronger. They had lost the ability to agree on what was real. Marcus quietly listened to the intercepted broadcasts before looking toward Nathan. "They finally see it." Nathan gave a slow nod. "No." Marcus looked confused. "They finally admitted it." Nathan rested one hand on the command rail. "There is a difference." Olivia smiled faintly. "So what happens now?" Nathan watched the glowing clouds settle into calm, graceful patterns around the human fleet. Now they stopped fighting us. He looked toward the distant Dominion formation, where uncertainty had replaced arrogance. From this moment on, they began arguing with every assumption that brought them here in the first place. The silence inside the Dominion flagship lasted longer than any alarm ever could. Warlord Kaler Voss stood motionless as fresh reports continued arriving from every corner of the fleet. None of them agreed with one another, yet every one of them reached the same conclusion. The human formation remained untouched, while Dominion commanders were requesting navigation confirmation from ships only a few hundred miles away. Kaler finally looked toward his communications officer. "Open a secure channel." Moments later, Admiral Nathan Brooks appeared on the main display. He was exactly as he had been since the beginning of the encounter, standing calmly with both hands resting behind his back. No victory speech. No celebration. No hint of satisfaction. Kaler studied him for several long seconds before speaking. "You planned this for 20 years. Nathan answered with quiet honesty. "Longer than that." "Why?" Nathan looked beyond the camera toward the glowing clouds outside his bridge. "Because every civilization eventually meets someone stronger. We learned that lesson early. We decided that if another war ever came, we would prepare before anyone believed preparation was necessary." Kaler lowered his voice. "You could have built larger fleets. We did something harder." Nathan replied. "We learned to be patient." The words settled heavily between them. Kaler had spent decades believing power meant building bigger armies, louder weapons, and faster ships. Standing before him was someone who had invested the same years into something almost invisible. Careful planning, quiet engineering, ordinary people doing ordinary jobs that no enemy had considered important. "You never wanted to destroy us," Kaler said. Nathan slowly shook his head. "If we wanted destruction, we would have chosen a different path years ago. We wanted you to understand something before either side reached a point where nobody could return." Kaler looked around his own bridge. Officers who had laughed only hours earlier were now helping one another rebuild navigation charts by hand. They were speaking calmly again, not because they had won, but because panic had finally given way to humility. He realized that was the first useful thing anyone aboard his flagship had done all day. "What happens now?" he asked. Nathan answered with the same steady voice that had carried through every conversation since the chase began. "Now your fleet leaves HFY. And if we return?" Nathan smiled gently. "Then you already know the way in. We hope you also remember the way out." The secure channel closed. No threats had been exchanged. No demands had been made. Hours later, the Dominion fleet slowly turned away from the glowing heart of the nebula, leaving behind the place they had once believed was nothing more than empty space. On the Resolute, Marcus Bennett watched the last distant engine signatures disappear before letting out a long breath. "Sir, was this really a victory?" Nathan remained quiet for a moment. "Victories fade." Marcus looked over. "Then what lasts?" Nathan picked up his cold coffee, looked at it for a second, and smiled. "The lesson people carry home." He set the mug back on the console and looked one final time at the calm, silent clouds surrounding the fleet. Most people think strength is the ability to hit harder than everyone else. They forget that real strength is building something so carefully that one day it protects lives without anyone noticing who built it. Months later, every major military academy in known space rewrote one sentence inside its strategic doctrine. It did not mention railguns. It did not mention plasma weapons. It did not even mention HFY by name. It simply read, "Never mistake quiet preparation for weakness, because the strongest civilization is often the one that spent the longest time choosing peace, while making certain it would never be helpless if peace failed." And among human sailors, another saying quietly took its place beside the old traditions. They never repeated it loudly. They never painted it across their ships. They simply passed it from one generation to the next. Patience is not the opposite of strength. Sometimes, patience is what strength looks like before the world finally notices it.